Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cal Voice's presentation on California Peer Support Specialist Certification. In this webinar, we're specifically going to be going over the grandparenting process. So today we're going to cover 6 topics with you. We'll be going over the Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist Certification, providing an overview. We'll discuss the grandparenting process specifically. We'll talk about how do you provide proof of grandparenting eligibility. We'll discuss the certification scholarships. We'll walk you through how to submit your online application, and then we will finish up with a recap and discuss next steps. Just to put out some training resources that you might want to get familiar with. The first is that Cal Mesa did release a Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist Certification grandparenting process checklist that you can view on their website. There is also scholarship information available. And then Cal Mesa recently released a web page directly focused on peer certifications. You want to make sure you check out that link as well. So we're going to go ahead and jump into part 1, where we're going to discuss peer certification and kind of provide you an overview of what that is.
Hey everyone, it's Danielle. We're going to talk about California Peer Support Specialist Certification and just give you a quick reminder and overview of what it is. So as you may recall, the Peer Support Specialist Certification Program Act of 2020 was passed in 2020. I know, surprising. We often refer to it as SB 803. So it was passed by the California legislature and signed by the governor in September of 2020. It recognizes certified peer support specialists as a distinct Medi-Cal provider type. And it also recognizes peer support specialist services that are delivered by certified peer support specialists as a distinct Medi-Cal service type that's eligible for federal reimbursement. It also passes responsibility for administering and implementing peer certification programs to the participating counties themselves. So it's not a statewide mandate. And the state itself is not responsible for administering one universal peer certification program throughout California. So it gets a little bit tricky because of that. So just to give you a reminder of what certification does and what the requirements are, the key takeaways, in order to use the new Medi-Cal billing codes for peer support specialist services, counties must affirmatively opt into peer certification because remember, it's not a statewide mandate. Counties actually have to decide to participate. The peers in that county must be certified in California. So they have to go through the process of getting certified, meeting the requirements of SB 803 in California. And then the services that peers are delivering, they must actually be authorized by CMS or the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and have Medicaid billing codes that are attached to them. So there are 3 prerequisites or requirements to be able to use those new Medi-Cal billing codes. Cal Mesa is acting as the certifying body for the 52 participating counties in California. So you may recall that I said that the state passed the responsibility for administering peer certification onto the individual counties. The counties have gotten together, 52 of them have decided to opt in, and use Cal Mesa to act as a single certifying body. So Cal Mesa is really stepping into the role that the state declined to step into. And peers must meet all eligibility requirements in order to become certified. We'll go over those requirements. And then peers first acquire certification through one of 3 processes. So they can either get certified through the grandparenting process, which is what this particular training focuses on. They can get certified through out-of-state reciprocity if they have certification already in another state. Or if neither of those options apply, they can get certified through the initial certification process. So as you may recall, I mentioned that there were 52 counties that were participating in Cal Mesa's peer certification program. The following 7 counties, as far as we know, have not yet opted in to Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist certification. So this was as of last month. This is to the best of our knowledge. So if you live in one of these counties currently, and counties is in quotation marks because certain cities have their own programs that are considered counties under the Mental Health Services Act. If you live in one of these areas or jurisdictions, then your county is not participating. So you may not be eligible for peer support specialist certification at this time. So if you live in Alpine County, if you live in the city of Berkeley, if you live in Imperial County, Mariposa County, Napa, San Benito County, or Tri-Cities. Now, the city of Berkeley is located in Alameda County, which is participating, and Tri-Cities, I believe, is located in LA County, which is participating. So there may be a workaround for that, but you're going to have to talk to your county behavioral health agency, talk to whomever it is in charge, and ensure that you have an opportunity to get certified maybe through one of those other entities. Yes.
So Danielle, let's say I live in Alpine County, but I work in Amador County, and Amador is opting into certification. Can Amador submit my name as, I'm working in their county? So because I'm working in their county, I would qualify to bill and be certified?
Yes. Okay. So that's a really good distinction, because it really is the county in which you're working, not necessarily the county in which you live, right? So, you would want to make sure that you talk to the county. I'm sure, like for instance, in the example that you gave, if you're working in Amador, you would go to the behavioral health director in Amador County and just say, hey, I just want to confirm that I qualify for certification because I'm actually working in a participating county. So yes, under that circumstance, I would assume that you would certainly qualify. It would be the other situation where, let's say you live in Amador County, but you work in Alpine County, and Alpine County itself is not participating. So in that case, your employer, who is the county, or if you work for a provider in Alpine County that only operates in Alpine County, in that circumstance, you may not be eligible to get certification, even though you live in a participating county. So it's all about where you work. Got it. Because you're using the certification for work purposes. Good question. So as you recall, there are 3 first-time certification processes. First is grandparenting, again, which is what we're talking about today. Now, grandparenting, that option is only available through December 31st of 2022, and it is only for peers who were employed in a peer support role as of January 1st of 2022 or before, and who have at least 1,550 hours of relevant work experience. The other options for certification are out-of-state reciprocity. And as I mentioned, that's for peers already certified outside of California. And then the third option is initial certification for peers that don't meet the requirements for either grandparenting or out-of-state reciprocity. So the trick is that with all 3 processes, there are some basic eligibility requirements that peers have to meet regardless of what process they're applying through. So in order to acquire certification, all peers, whether through grandparenting, out-of-state reciprocity, or initial certification, they have to be at least 18 years old. They have to have a high school diploma, GED, or equivalent. They have to self-identify as someone who is living in recovery from a mental illness or substance use disorder. Basically, you have to self-identify as a consumer in recovery, or as a parent, caregiver, or family member of a consumer, whether it be an adult consumer or a child or youth. They have to be willing to share their lived experience. They have to have a strong dedication to recovery. They have to agree in writing to adhere to the Medi-Cal Code of Ethics for peer support specialists. They have to successfully complete the curriculum and training requirements. And those curriculum and training requirements are different based on which process you're applying through. So for instance, the grandparenting process curriculum and training requirements are different than the initial certification curriculum and training requirements. But regardless of which process, you still have to meet the curriculum and training requirements for that process. You also have to eventually pass a certification exam. Now, to maintain certification, all peers, whether they first got their certification through initial certification, grandparenting, or out-of-state reciprocity, they have to adhere to the Code of Ethics and biennially, every 2 years, sign an affirmation, right? So they have to continue to conduct themselves in a way that is in alignment with the Medi-Cal Code of Ethics for peer support specialists. And they also have to complete any required continuing education, training, and recertification requirements. And recertification is every 2 years in California. So that's that for the recap and reminder.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on to part 2, where we are going to talk about the grandparenting process, which is why we're actually here doing this webinar today. So as we mentioned, there are 3 first-time certification processes, and we are going to focus on grandparenting, right? And this is a time-limited option, and so we want to make sure that we're providing you the information and steps that you will need to qualify for and apply for the grandparenting process. So to qualify for certification under the grandparenting process, peers must meet all basic eligibility requirements. So those are the eligibility requirements that you would need whether you were applying through the grandparenting process, out-of-state reciprocity, or initial certification, plus all grandparenting eligibility requirements, which Cal Mesa has really identified, and Cal Mesa is going to evaluate unique grandparent applications that don't meet the standard application requirement on a case-by-case basis. So you're going to meet the standard eligibility requirements plus any grandparenting eligibility requirements. And if you maybe don't meet a requirement by a small margin, maybe it's the number of hours that you've worked in the field, Cal Mesa does have the option to evaluate that and make an exception if they deem that to be appropriate. So let's go through those basic eligibility requirements. So first, especially for grandparenting, we need to work or volunteer in a participating county. And Danielle went over that briefly in part 1. You need to be 18 years of age or older. You need to have a high school diploma, GED equivalent, or a college degree. You'll need to self-identify as a client or consumer living in recovery, or as a parent, caregiver, or family member of a client consumer. You need to be willing to share your lived experience, have a strong dedication to recovery, agree to the Medi-Cal Code of Ethics, and you'll do that in the application. You'll need to have completed a curriculum and any training requirements, and that would be in the pre-application phase. And you want to also ensure that you pass the certification exam. So that would be kind of the last step after you've completed the application.
And I just want to jump in and really mention quickly, because I've gone through the application just to see what peers who are applying need to do when they're applying for certification. And you will need to show proof that you've completed the curriculum and training requirements before at the time that you apply. So you'll need to actually complete those training requirements before you apply. So I just want to let everybody know, if you have not completed your whatever training requirements are necessary, if they're not done yet, then you will need to complete them before you are eligible even to apply, because you won't be able to finish your application until you upload proof of those trainings.
So just a reminder, right, there are 7 counties that have not yet opted into the Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist certification. And if we're going to get certified through the grandparenting process, we need to ensure that we're working in a county that has opted in, right? So if we're in Alpine, Imperial, Mariposa, Napa, or San Benito, there might be some more challenges with the grandparenting process since they're not opting in to certification.
And it could be that those counties are intending to create their own peer certification programs, because counties can do that. So perhaps they have not opted into Cal Mesa's peer certification program that Cal Mesa is operating for 52 counties. It could be that those counties are planning to or have already begun to implement their own. So that's another option too. So a lot of these rules and requirements that we're talking about generally would still apply. It would just be the mechanism by which you would apply for grandparenting in that county. So if you're working in one of those counties, you may want to talk to your behavioral health director, your MHSA coordinator, or your workforce education and training coordinator in your county to make a determination: is my county actually going to create its own peer certification program, or what? Because it's still a possibility that you may qualify for grandparenting in your own county. We just don't know.
And that's going to be, I think, an important question for people to ask, regardless of how they want to get certified, whether it's the initial certification or grandparenting or out-of-state reciprocity.
Yes, exactly.
So let's go into those eligibility requirements, right? So we talked about the basic requirements that we would have no matter how we get certified, but there are specific grandparenting eligibility requirements that you need to meet if you're going to apply through that process. And just a note to remind folks that Cal Mesa must evaluate unique grandparent applications that do not meet the standard application requirements on a case-by-case basis, right? And I think that's really important because we have a lot of peers who maybe have worked in the system for a really long time, and maybe the pandemic had an impact on whether or not they were employed on January 1st of 2022. So we know that there will be unique cases. And so if you have been working as a peer for a long time, and when it comes to, any of the eligibility, if you kind of meet it, but there's an issue with your particular situation, reach out to the certifying body, to Cal Mesa, to see if you can get an exception for your application. So for grandparenting, you need to apply by December 31st of 22. So again, the grandparenting process is a time-limited opportunity for individuals that have been working in the field as a peer. So you need to be employed as a peer as of January 1st of 2022. And again, remembering there may be an exception here.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in really quickly. So because peers who may qualify for grandparenting need to apply by December 31st of 2022, you have until that time to meet all of the eligibility requirements. The only one that you can't possibly meet by that time, if you don't already meet it, is be employed as a peer as of January 1, right? But I just wanted to put that out there because now that the grandparenting applications are open, everyone is, likely, who thinks they qualify is going to be in a rush to make sure that they get their grandparenting applications in. But I want everyone to take a deep breath, because if you don't have all of the requirements done yet, you still have several months in order to complete those requirements. The issue would just be whether or not you qualify for a scholarship.
Right. And this would really be around if you don't have the training done or your CEUs or something like that.
Exactly.
So if, again, we're going to apply for grandparenting, another eligibility requirement is that we have the minimum work experience required. And for grandparenting, they require 1 year, so 12 months of peer support work and 1,550 hours of paid or unpaid work experience as a peer specialist, right? So that could be volunteer work. The other option is to have 1,550 hours of work experience, so working as a peer specialist in the last 3 years, with at least 500 hours completed in the last 12 months, right? So that might be individuals who are working part-time, volunteering, maybe they're not full-time. They've gotten that 1,550 hours. It needs to have been within the last 3 years, and 500 of those hours needs to have been in the last 12 months. Other eligibility requirements. So the third eligibility requirement is that you need to have completed 20 hours of continuing education training in the last 2 years, including at least 6 hours of law and ethics. And we've had a lot of conversations around, well, what is law and ethics? And I don't know how detailed they've been in actually defining what that means or at all. And so just ensuring that you've had some type of ethics training as part of your continuing education or peer training that you've completed. Another training eligibility requirement is the completion of a peer training. And I hope I'm not totally wrong, but the continuing education, your peer training could actually be counting towards your continuing education as well.
Yes. I think actually the way that they phrased it was that the continuing education could count as your peer training. Same thing, really. But I think that the reason why they were making a distinction is because a peer training is assumed to be like one training curriculum, right? For instance, if you went through WiseU or you went through another provider's peer training program, that would count as a peer training. However, some peers have not gone through a comprehensive peer training, but they have acquired, various trainings here and there, which would count as continuing education hours. So if you have 20 continuing education hours and they cover the fundamentals of peer support and recovery, those continuing education hours, although it's not an entire curriculum, it's, kind of Frankenstein piecemeal together, those hours can count towards your peer training requirement.
What a relief.
Yeah. I think the other question though would be, okay, if I did do a peer training, does that count towards my continuing education? I would say probably yes, because we know it counts in reverse. I wouldn't want anyone to worry about that because there is no specific minimum requirement of hours for a peer training. Cal Mesa has not defined how many hours that peer training has to be. So I think they're really kind of interchangeable.
Absolutely. Another unique eligibility requirement for grandparenting is that you need to submit 3 letters of recommendation And so that would be one from a supervisor, one from a colleague, or another professional. So it might be another peer you're working with. It could be a case manager, a clinician, just anyone else that you're working with within your role. And then also they want one self-recommendation describing your current role and responsibilities as a peer specialist. So let's jump into these a little more. So the first eligibility requirement was to be employed as a peer as of January 1st of 22. So employed means paid or unpaid, right? So whether you were an employee or a volunteer. As a peer, right? So employed as a peer. As a peer means performing duties a certified peer support specialist would perform. So i.e. peer support specialist services, right? And this is important because a lot of people have said, oh, I need to have 1,550 hours of work experience. Well, it's not any work experience. It's work experience performing peer support specialist services, right?
That's why you're being grandparented in, because you have experience as a peer support specialist or performing the duties of a peer support specialist. It's not because you're new to the profession and are just beginning and you have 200 hours of work experience. Grandparenting is for seasoned peer support workers.
So let's define that a little bit, right? So peer support special services. These are culturally competent services that promote engagement, socialization, recovery, self-sufficiency, self-advocacy, development of natural supports, and identification of strengths. Peer support specialist services include, but are not limited to, prevention services, support, coaching, facilitation, or education that is individualized. And with this, I feel like they're really trying to capture the services that you would provide as a peer, whether you were in a clinical setting, a peer-run setting, a wellness center, whatever that might be, right? But ensuring that work experience is really tied to that peer support specialist role. And then, as of 1/1/22, so we want to be employed, paid or unpaid, as a peer, doing peer support specialist services on January 1st of 22, right? And that is I know challenging for some people, especially because of, employment issues that have been going on over the last couple of years, job stability, other things that folks have been experiencing. But again, grandparenting is just one way to get certified. And so if for some reason you didn't meet the grandparenting requirements, there are going to be other options for you when it comes to getting certified as a peer. And so kind of with that, like if you were employed as a peer before January 1st, but not on that date,
I think they would qualify.
And I think that's one of those things where we're saying you may have a unique situation where maybe you can get an exception for that. So you would want to reach out to Cal Mesa or the certifying body to find out, can they make an exception? If I've been doing peer support for 15 years,
right,
and just wasn't employed for maybe 2 or 3 months,
right,
do I not qualify?
Right.
And then what if you were employed as a peer on January 1st, but not continuously since? So maybe I was employed on January 1st, got laid off January 15th. How does that work, right? So that's, another unknown.
Right. Yeah, they just didn't really define the timing requirements very, very clearly, right? So I can think of a lot of weird one-off situations, like Stephanie mentioned, where we're just not sure. Like, let's say you were in that situation, you've been performing peer support services for 15 years, you're clearly the intended beneficiary of the grandparenting process, but maybe you got laid off, you're employed on January 1st, but got laid off, shortly thereafter, or maybe you took some time off, recently because you had medical issues or whatever, right? It's not very clear if you have to be employed between the time of January 1st and the time that you apply for certification. I personally think that if you have, an extended track record of experience, performing peer support duties, that you probably will qualify, but it's not up to me. So you want to make sure that, you do your best to get your questions answered either before or after you submit your application.
So let's jump into that second requirement, and that was having the minimum work experience, right? So we're going to talk about how much and what kind, right? So for quantity, right, number of hours, we want at least 1 year or 12 cumulative months, right? Cumulative. They don't do back to back, but 12 months. And at least 1,550 hours earned in the last 3 years.
but you don't have to have 3 years. You only need to have 12 months, right? So if you earn the 1,550 hours in the last 8 months, then no, you wouldn't qualify because you don't have at least 12 months. But if you earned it in the last 2 years, yes, you would qualify because you don't need 3 years of experience.
As long as at least 500 of those hours are earned in the last 12 months.
Right.
Right. So at least 12 months of work, at least 1,550 hours, and at least 500 of those hours being earned in the last 12 months.
And I would think that the last 12 months means the last 12 months before you submit your application, right? So that's another timing issue. So remember, you can apply for grandparenting through December 31st of 22, right? So if for some reason you don't have yet this year those 500 hours, you might want to do some volunteering or something like that so you can pick up those hours so that by the time you apply, you will have those 500 hours in the last 12 months.
So let's say, like, if I got my job November 1st of 21 and I work full time, I could technically qualify for grandparenting December 31st of 22, get that application in for the end of the year, because I would have the 12 months, the 1,550 hours.
Yep, exactly. And the 500 hours in the last 12 months.
Right. So now let's talk about quality, right? So this could be paid or unpaid peer work. You could be an employee, you could be a volunteer. I think one of the keys here is that it's supervised, right? So it's not informal. It's not me providing peer support to my friends or my family members or kind of on my own as an independent peer support worker in the community, right? So not informal, casual, but really in a setting where it's supervised or someone to verify this information, someone overseeing my work. And performing duties a certified peer support specialist would perform, right? So again, going back to those peer support specialist services that we discussed in the last couple of slides.
Yeah.
So let's look at that third requirement. We need to have completed 20 hours of continuing education, right? And this can be relevant in professional competencies obtained via relevant in-state, out-of-state, or national educational forums. So they're not really saying who has to provide the continuing education, right? It could be in a variety of ways. I know a lot of people go to conferences. There's a lot of events that happen in the community that folks are able to get their community education hours.
I think the hard part will be is that these standards were just formalized recently. And so a lot of the CE hours that somebody may be wanting to apply towards this requirement, they weren't viewed as CE hours when they were initially provided. So for instance, like let's say you went to a conference last year that was like a peer training conference or like a peer support conference, and let's say it was 8 hours long, but at the time, the people who were hosting the conference didn't know that those 8 hours would count towards your CE hours for grandparenting, right? So it's not necessarily that those 8 hours won't count, it's just the tricky part would be, okay, I need to get some sort of proof that I attended this now, right, because I need to use it for CE purposes. And I'm not necessarily going to get a certificate from, the conference host or facilitator because at the time they weren't marketing their conference as a CE option.
Right. And for some people, that might be kind of like the homework that you're going to have to do is reaching back out to places to say, hey, I know you didn't provide this, but can I get a certificate of attendance or completion or something to verify that I participated in that?
Exactly. And so that's going to be a little bit tricky because you're trying to go backward and recreate the record to prove that you participated in activities that count towards your CE requirements.
Mm-hmm. So along with the CEs, you want to ensure that at least 6 of the 20 hours that you are spending on training needs to be in law and ethics. And kind of going back to what we said, law and ethics is not defined and there are no specific standards identified. So there's no requirement that law trainings be developed or delivered by someone in a legal education, right? So for example, we have our ethics boundaries and confidentiality training. And since law and ethics has not been defined, for us, that training should meet that requirement.
Right. And it is at least 6 hours. Mm-hmm. So, but, given the fact that law needs to be included, I'm personally offended that it doesn't have to be a training developed by someone with a legal education. But, that's the way the cookie crumbles, I suppose.
So acceptable CE training courses. So this could be a peer certification training that you participated in. It could be other courses relevant.
Oh yeah, so you were right.
Oh.
You were right. We answered that question answers that. So yeah, it does go both ways. This confirms it because what we're quoting here in this slide is directly from Cal Mesa's program. So if you're applying for grandparenting through Cal Mesa, your peer certification training will account towards your CE requirements, and your CE requirements will count towards your peer certification
if they've been completed in the last 2 years.
Correct.
So you can also take courses relevant to the practice of peer and recovery services, and that's really vague, right? So that could be a lot of things that count there. You want to look at trainings that focus on significant recent developments in the discipline of peer support and recovery. Trainings that concentrate on areas of specialization. So if you're in a parent, caregiver, or family member peer role, right? What type of specialization trainings have you been in? Or, persons experiencing a crisis, people who are unhoused, if you're working with individuals who have justice system involvement, like any concentrated areas of training are going to count towards your continuing education as well. And then any direct care courses that cover peer recovery and specialty areas like theoretical framework of recovery, intervention techniques with individuals and families, systems of care, really kind of anything really tied to that direct care, direct support that you would be providing.
So like mental health first aid.
Or RAP.
Yep.
Awesome. So let's go a little deeper. So you can also take some indirect care courses that cover pragmatic aspects of clinical practice, like legal or ethical issues. What does consultation look like? Record keeping, supervision training, those things would count. Also, you can take courses that meet the continuing education requirements for licensed professional counselors. Those are LPCs. Licensed marriage and family therapists, licensed clinical social workers, certified alcohol and drug counselors, licensed alcohol and drug counselors, or continuing medical education. And for a lot of peers that are working as part of multidisciplinary teams, a lot of times you're going to trainings with your other colleagues that might not tie 100% to your role, but if they meet the needs for continuing education for the other colleagues and professionals that you're working with, it's likely that it will meet the continuing education requirements for the grandparenting process as well. And then lastly, and I think a lot of people will be really happy to see this, an undergraduate or graduate course in behavior health related field that pertains to direct interactions with consumers. So basically 3 hours of coursework equals 12 hours of CEUs. And this has come up a lot, when we've had our own webinars or listening sessions, folks have said, well, I went to school for this, like my degree doesn't count or my college classes don't count. So if it's been in the last 2 years, and again, it's specifically related to behavioral health and direct interactions with consumers, then those coursework hours can count for you as well.
And do you know this, Steph? Do they mean by 3 hours, do they mean 3 units?
Oh, it doesn't say units.
It doesn't say units, but 3 hours is not 12 hours. So
right.
I don't know.
Well, that would be an interesting challenge to make.
Right. But one of you should try that.
Right. And the nice thing is that I don't know anyone that's taking a 3-hour course out of college. Like the whole course is 3 hours.
Right, exactly. That's why I was thinking it must be units,
yeah.
Right?
But again, this is not our type.
It could be like a seminar or something like that.
You're right, there could be.
So I don't know. But in my head, I was like, oh, I think they mean 3 units.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Try it, guys.
Let us know. The fourth requirement is completion of a peer training. So they did define this a little bit. So acceptable trainings shall consist of any training consistent with aspects of the peer support specialist discipline that are fundamental to the understanding or the practice of peer support and recovery. And that could be a lot of different trainings that I know that are out there. There's no minimum hours requirement, no minimum as far as like how recent or how long ago you completed that training. And this might count for courses related to the 20 hours of CEUs. So, I think that there's a lot of flexibility in this kind of term peer training, at least for grandparenting. When we look at initial certification, it's a lot more limited and defined. But if you're looking to grandparent, there's a lot of opportunity here and flexibility when it comes to training.
Yeah. And so like, for instance, if you've gone through YSU or you've gone through any other like peer training in California that's offered, I know that there's a variety of agencies that offer peer trainings prior to certification coming around. Those will likely count to your completion of a peer training requirement. The only issue is if you finished it more than 2 years ago, it's not going to count towards your CE training requirement.
So you'll meet the peer training requirement, but you would have still you needed 20 hours of other education to meet that.
In the last 2 years. Yeah.
So I heard you say like a training in California. What if somebody took like a Depression Bipolar Support Alliance training out of state?
Yeah, I would think that would probably count.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I said California only because I know that there's multiple organizations in California that provide peer trainings, but I have no reason to think that if they took it from an out-of-state provider, that it wouldn't count.
Good to know. So acceptable peer trainings. It could be a peer certification training. It could be courses relevant to the practice of peer recovery and resiliency. It could be trainings that focus on significant recent developments in discipline of peer support and recovery. Again, trainings that concentrate in the areas of specialization. We went over this before, so it could be, if you're a parent, caregiver, family member role, if you're working with individuals in crisis or those who are unhoused, or if you're working with folks in, that have justice involvement, those trainings would be acceptable for that kind of peer training category as well. And then any direct care courses that cover peer recovery in specialty areas. So it seems very similar to what the CE requirements would be.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit more restrictive because it really has to be focused on the practice of peer support and recovery principles. So it's not going to include all of those non-peer specific CE type courses like for other behavioral health professionals. This is for the peer training requirement. So that's where you might also have a little bit of issue.
If I took a peer training, it for sure is going to meet the CEs if it's been in the last 2 years. But if I took CEs and they aren't necessarily, and maybe they're behavior health, but not related to peer support, those might not count towards my peer training.
Exactly. So most of them will overlap, right? But if you, for instance, when you're talking about somebody who's on a multidisciplinary team and they went to maybe some of the trainings for like the LCSWs that they work with or the psychiatric nurses or something like that, and it is somewhat relevant to what they do. The issue is it probably would not count towards a peer training because it doesn't focus on peer support or in the practice of recovery, right? So for the peer training requirements specifically, the training does need to be focused on that. But the good news is there's no, maximum retroactivity or anything like that. So if you took a peer training 5 years ago, it's going to count as long as you can provide evidence that you completed that training.
And then it's just your CE, your continuing education that you would need to make sure that you did within the last 2 years or that you do before you start your application for grandparenting.
Exactly.
So let's look at those letters of recommendation. So you need to have one from a supervisor. So this could be a current or former supervisor. It needs to be on agency letterhead with the supervisor's name and contact information. And so here's a tip. You want to use your supervisor's letter to meet multiple eligibility requirements. So remember, some of the requirements that you need to meet is that you need to be employed as a peer on January 1st. You need to have minimum work experience, right? So it's that 1,550 hours, and you need a supervisor recommendation, right? So if you have a supervisor, or if I'm a supervisor, I might write a letter, saying like, Danielle has been a great employee. Danielle was employed on January 1st of 2022 and has been employed at our organization for the last 3 years and did work at least the 1,550 hours. We would highly recommend her for certification as her work in the community has proven to have positive client outcomes, whatever. But with that one letter, I've been like employed on January 1st, meets the 1,550 hours, and is the recommendation for the supervisor. So when we start to upload our documents to prove that we meet eligibility, I might be able to upload this one letter into 3 different places to meet those requirements rather than having to go and I need my letter from my supervisor, and then I'm going to go to HR and get something from them saying I was employed on January 1st and I worked these many hours. So this might simplify your process in collecting that proof for your certification application. You'll also need a letter of recommendation from a colleague or another professional. You'll need their name and contact information on that letter as well. And then you will provide a self-recommendation where you're going to be describing your role, your job duties, and your work experience as a peer. And this letter has a 1-page maximum. So Cal Mesa did provide a standardized letter of recommendation template. It is available at this link. It can be used for all 3 letters of recommendation, whether it be the supervisor, the colleague, or yourself. So in order to use that, you'll need to download the document to your computer, type in the requested information, save the letter, sign the letter. You want to scan that signed letter to create a PDF document, right? So you'll need it to be a PDF for a letter if you're going to add an e-signature to it. And you'll need to upload your letter to the online certification application. However, there is something to be aware of. It's not clear how this template is going to meet the requirement for the supervisor letter of recommendation because the recommendation letters are required to have a company letterhead on them.
Just the supervisor one.
Just the supervisor one, right? Yeah. So if I give my supervisor this template provided by Cal Mesa, it is not on letterhead. So we need to ensure that, if we're providing the template, maybe we provide it and say, hey, I wanted to give you this template to kind of give you an idea of what to include in the letter, but reminding them that it needs to be on company letterhead in order for it to count.
And if you or someone else at your organization is, quite sophisticated with a computer, they can actually complete the template and someone can still put it on letterhead for the organization. But it requires a little bit of, finessing and somebody who has a somewhat, intermediate computer skills in order to do. So it's not that you can't do that. It's just there's an extra step that would be involved if you wanted to do that. Because obviously using the template makes things a lot easier for everybody involved. It's just that the template would then have to be put on your agency's letterhead.
So with those letters of self-recommendation, you need to ensure that the letter includes the name of your workplace and what you do in your role, right? So you want to make sure you pull out your job description, right? And then think about what do I do day to day and ensure that you're including that on your self-recommendation letter.
Yeah, and that should be going back to the definition of peer support specialist services. So if it's like part of your duties is running up to the store and grabbing supplies for your office.
And I make the coffee for the wellness center.
Then you're not going to include that because that's not peer support specialist services. But if your duty is running support groups, providing one-on-one individualized care, accompanying clients to their appointments, something like that, then you certainly would include that.
And I think sometimes it's also being really thoughtful in how we describe something, right? So maybe somebody's job at a wellness center is that they staff the front desk. And it's like, oh, well, how does this count? And it's like, in my role, I create a welcoming environment for clients. I support them in accessing their support groups and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so really
linkage,
like what do you do in your role that meets the requirement, not just kind of,
the generic description of the duty.
Yeah. Right. And so going back, a few slides and kind of look, or even in some of the documents that are available and really trying to hone in on like, well, what does this say that peer support services are and really highlighting those in your letter.
Right.
Your letter should also include the number of hours you work per week, the date your employment began, your position. Your title doesn't have to be peer support specialist, right? You might be a family advocate. You might be a navigator,
recovery coach.
Right. There's a lot of titles out there. So ensuring that you include your title. And then just some tips or recommendations, kind of going back to what we were saying, you want to refer to the list of job duties in your current job description. And you might also want to check any past timesheets or pay stubs to find out the total number of hours that you worked.
Right. But you don't necessarily have to include the total number of hours here. It really should be in your supervisor letter of recommendation. So, if you can't find that or if it's too difficult, let your supervisor confirm that in their letter.
Yeah, but definitely name your workplace, what you do. And that job description, if you can get it, hopefully you have one, really use that. in drafting your letter, because it's, part of your duties are to provide peer support, and it might already be laid out for you.
Yep. You don't have to describe it all on your own.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we talked about what are the grandparenting eligibility requirements. Now we're going to talk about the specific proof or documentation that you need in order to show that you meet all of those requirements, right? So what documentation do you need, right? So Cal Mesa, because they are the certifying body, they determine what proof of eligibility is required for the folks who are applying for grandparenting. They identify which eligibility requirements you have to prove, what type of proof is acceptable, and then how you are expected to submit your proof. You're going to actually upload it to Cal Mesa's peer certification website. So now that you know that you're going to need some documentation, you want to make sure that before you apply, you gather your proof of eligibility and save it in the required file formats before you begin. Okay. And so just as a little tip, PDF, JPG, JPEG, and PNG files are usually preferred. If none of that makes any sense to you, don't worry about it. What you need to know, though, is that you need to have your documentation saved as digital files on whatever device that you're going to be using to apply for certification. So if you're going to apply from your laptop, then they need to be saved on your laptop. If you're going to apply from your phone, they need to be saved on your phone. You just need to have access to those documents on the device that you're using to apply for certification.
And with the proof, I know a lot of people might be limited in what technology they have access to, but if you have a phone, you can take a picture of your training certificate. You can take a picture of your high school diploma. You can take a picture of a lot of things and upload them from your phone. So that's where those kind of JPEG type,
because those are all image files, right? So JPG, JPEG, and PNG, those are image files. So you can literally, as Steph said, you can just take a picture of the document. You don't have to scan it. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to convert the file type on your computer. You don't have to do any of that. You just take a picture of it. And as long as it's saved on whatever device you're using to apply, then you can upload it right to your application from your device. Good point. So just a reminder of the basic eligibility requirements: work or volunteer in a participating county. That's most important, right? You need to be at least 18 years old. You have to have a high school diploma, GED or equivalent, or a college degree, okay? So let's say that, I know especially in California, you can attend a community college even if you don't have a high school diploma. So maybe you get an AA from a community college, even though you don't have a high school diploma or a GED. That AA will count towards this requirement. So I just want to throw that out there. You need to self-identify as a client or a consumer living in recovery, or as a parent, caregiver, or a family member of a client or consumer. You need to be willing to share your lived experience. You have to have a strong dedication to recovery, agree to the Medi-Cal Code of Ethics that is going to be integrated into the application when you apply. You need to have completed the curriculum and training requirements, which need to be done before you apply, because remember, you're going to have to upload proof that you completed those requirements in your application. You also will need to pass a certification exam, but obviously that is going to happen after you apply, because it is a logical impossibility for you to have passed a certification exam before you applied. So how do you show proof of these basic eligibility requirements? So number one, you have to be 18 years old. You need to provide a copy or a picture of a government issued identification card or some other ID with a photograph, such as a driver's license, identification card, passport. It could probably also be a tribal membership card. Maybe even if you go to a public university or college, that would be a government issued identification card, but it needs to have your photograph on it, and obviously has to have your date of birth, right? Because if it doesn't have your date of birth, then you can't prove that you're 18 years old. Number two is to have a high school diploma or equivalent or a college degree. You need to submit educational transcripts or your diploma or GED or your college degree to the Cal Mesa certification website.
And I just want to jump in, I think that the number two specifically is something that if you don't have it right now, you need to go start requesting it, right? I know a lot of folks who graduated years and years ago, and they're I don't even know where my high school diploma or GED or transcripts are. And you might have to reach out to somewhere you graduated from 10 plus years ago, and it might take them a little while to get it to you. So time is of the essence.
Yeah. But if you have a diploma hanging on your wall, if you have the little, like, you know, the little foldy diploma thing that you get when you graduate high school, I don't know what those
Take
are
a picture.
called. Take a picture. Exactly. Take a picture. And also, I will say that this language is copied directly from CalMesa's instructions. It does not say that you need an official transcript. Okay. It doesn't say that. It just says submit educational transcript. So the difference between an official and an unofficial is usually, you know, the college actually embosses it or like sign, like there's some sort of stamp on the official.
Closed and sealed. And
yeah, exactly. That says this is official, right? So the thing is that if you can just log on to your school or whatever, or if you can email your school and they can send you an unofficial transcript, then it looks like you can probably just use that, you know? So I just wanted to throw that out there because a lot of times if you need an official transcript, that can take weeks, you know, in order to get, because it's going to come in the mail and like all of that stuff. But if you only need an unofficial, that's something that you should be able to get relatively easily. So there's that. Number 3 is self-identify as an individual with lived experience. And there is a self-attestation that is available through the online application process. And actually, it's really simple. You just check a box that says that you have lived experience. That's all you have to do. You don't have to go into it and like explain. You have to be willing to share your lived experience. And again, that is a self-attestation through the online application, literally a checkbox. And at the end, toward the end of this training, I actually took some screenshots to show you what the application itself looks like. So you know what to prepare yourself for when you go to apply. And you will see that it really is just a checkbox that you need to check off. You don't have to go into any in-depth explanation at all. So number 5 is to have a strong dedication to recovery. Again, it's just self-attestation. You check a box in the application itself. You need to agree to the Medi-Cal Code of Ethics for Peer Support Specialists. You sign an attestation. This is part of the online application process. So this one is not necessarily a checkbox. It's a pop-up box that comes up in the application itself. You scroll through it, you agree to adhere to it, and then you digitally sign your name to it. You need to complete the curriculum and training requirements. So in this case, you're going to refer to the specific requirements for grandparenting because as I mentioned before, depending on what process you're applying through, there's different curriculum and training requirements. So when we talk about the grandparenting eligibility requirements, we'll get into what proof is necessary for that. And then number 8 is pass a certification exam. Obviously, proof is not required at the time of application because you will not have taken the exam at the time of application. So grandparenting eligibility requirements, the reminder of these specific requirements just for grandparenting. You need to apply by 12/31/22. You need to be employed as a peer as of 1/1/22. You need to have that minimum work experience, the 12 months, 1,550 hours, and at least 500 in the last 12 months. You need to have the 20 hours of continuing education in the last 2 years, including at least 6 hours of law and ethics. You need to have completed a peer training, and you need 3 letters of recommendation. So what does the proof of these requirements look like? So be employed as a peer in a peer worker role, paid or unpaid as of January 1, 2022. You need to have a letter from your current or past employer. Remember, we're talking about your supervisor letter here and why it can fulfill several requirements. So if you have a letter from your current or past employer confirming that you've met this requirement, the letter must be on agency letterhead, and then you're going to submit it, upload it to your application on the CalMesa certification website. So in theory, you know, if you were employed as a peer at an agency that you don't work at anymore, then maybe you're not going to ask that supervisor to write your supervisor letter of recommendation. But you could reach out to like their office manager or the HR manager, and they could provide a confirmation letter for you saying that you were employed as a peer. Or if you're still working for the organization, again, you can use your supervisor letter to meet that requirement in addition to several other requirements. Number 2 is you have to have the required work experience, and you can meet that requirement by uploading a letter from your current or past employer confirming that you've met the requirement. Again, it must be on agency letterhead. So you would also submit that to the Cal Mesa certification website. Go ahead.
And so Danielle, for this particular section, there might be a case where I have a current employer and I have a past employer. So I might have two letters.
Right.
How does that work in the upload?
Okay. So when I went through the application, it's my recollection that you can only upload one document per requirement, one file per requirement. So if you worked at multiple organizations in order to get that 1,550 hours, you're going to have to do some finessing. You're going to need to integrate two different letters or two different, proof, documents of proof into one file, one digital file, right? Because as far as I can tell, you cannot pick multiple documents to upload for one requirement.
And for folks who might be panicking a little bit, how do I get two files into one? If you Google Adobe PDF Merger, it's a free web-based program where you can actually upload multiple documents and then they merge them into one file. And that's something that I've used frequently. So if you are running into that case where you need to get two files into one file, the Adobe PDF Merger can do that for you.
Yeah. And can they use that if, for instance, I'm assuming they would need to have a computer.
You would need to have a computer. I haven't tried it on a phone.
Okay. And also, if, for instance, the two documents are pictures, that they need to be PDFs. You need to have two separate PDFs, and then you can use that Adobe PDF Merger just to combine two existing PDF documents.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there is somewhat of a limitation there. You would need to have a computer, and the files that you're attempting to combine need to both be PDF documents as they currently exist. So just something to keep in mind. So there's, going to be a little bit of confusion around that. And it could be that when I went to upload documents, because I actually did, attach documents when I went through the application itself, maybe they let you pick multiple documents, but it was not clear that you were able to do that. It looked like you could only attach one document per requirement. And it also is possible that they could change the application in the future to allow people to upload multiple documents per requirement. But as of today, as of May 10th, what's today, May 10th? May 10th, as I currently recall, you can only do one file per requirement. So eligibility requirement for grandparenting number 3 is the completion of 20 hours of continuing education in the last 2 years with 6 hours of law and ethics. Now, you would need to upload any of the following or a combination to be submitted at the time of your application on the Cal Mesa certification website. So this is another situation where you may need to merge multiple documents together if you completed your training requirements from multiple sources. So you need a certificate of training completion or a letter from the training provider demonstrating proof of attendance of the training, or some sort of letter of accomplishment. I'm not really sure what that would be, but I don't know. But whatever you're providing needs to be on company letterhead from the training provider. And it has to include the date of the training, the title of the training, and the number of hours that you participated in order to qualify.
And so, I think a lot of peers have gone to peer trainings in the last 7 years where they might have gotten a certificate of completion, but it might not have the hours on there.
Right.
And that might be a case where you may have to reach out to the training provider to request an updated certificate so that you can meet this proof requirement when it comes to eligibility.
Right. Or perhaps they could give you like a training syllabus that says, oh, you can, for instance, like with WiseU, you completed WiseU in 2016. In 2016, our training syllabus was this, and it was these courses and these many hours per course. So it could be that you can still use your training certificate with that additional document, because I think I'm just thinking that it might be more difficult for some training providers to actually change their certificate of completion than it would be for them to just provide you with
so get a supplemental letter or proof
exactly
with your certificate.
Exactly. So, but yeah, that's a really good point, because If it's not on the face of the document itself, then it's not going to satisfy that requirement, unfortunately. And, you have to give some of these training organizations grace because they didn't know at the time that you were going to be needing this for a requirement in the future. So now that everybody knows going forward, they'll be sure to, any certificates of completion will be sure to include the information that you need in order for certification purposes. But
well, and I think going forward, be sure to ask. So if you go to a training and they, you need to make sure you're asking for them to give you a certificate of completion or attendance, if that's not something that they usually do, making sure it has the number of hours and things like that, so that when it comes up for renewal, you have all the information you need to provide.
Exactly. And there has to just be enough information that Cal Mesa can independently verify that you attended. So if they needed to call, for instance, whomever, like our program manager for YZU, hey, can you check your database and make sure that this person actually attended when they said, yep, they did. Okay, perfect. So they just need enough information that if they had to do an audit, they could do that. So number 4 is completion of a peer training, right? And so as you may recall, peer training is defined as training focused on concepts of peer recovery and resiliency. There is no minimum number of hours for the length of the peer training. So it could be 5 hours, right? Lucky you. If the peer training hours are used towards your CE hours requirement, though, remember that the documentation of attendance will be required. I don't know why they say that, because you need a documentation of attendance regardless, but it needs to be within the last 2 years, okay? So you can submit any of the following documentation to Cal Mesa when you're completing your application to prove that you meet the peer training requirement. Either a certificate of training completion with your name, date of training, and the training hours, a letter or email demonstrating proof of attendance, a certificate of completion, which is kind of the same thing as number 1, an e-learning transcript, and number 5 would be the letter of accomplishment on agency letterhead, and including your name, date of training, title of training, and the number of training hours. So this is a little bit confusing. I would probably say that the same standards for the CE trainings would apply. The big thing for the peer training is it has to be trainings that are relevant to peer support and recovery. So it can't be any of those non-peer specific CE type of courses. But again, it needs to be on agency letterhead. It needs to give enough information to Cal Mesa so that they can verify it if necessary. And then finally, number 5 is submit 3 letters of recommendation to Cal Mesa through the application. So you need one from a supervisor. Again, it has to be on company letterhead. It has to include your name, the supervisor's actual recommendation, and the name of the supervisor who's making the recommendation. Remember, there is that template that you can use, but there's an issue around whether or not it is going to be on company letterhead. You need to make sure that your supervisor knows how to put that template on company letterhead if they are going to use it. The second letter of recommendation you need is from a colleague or a professional. It can be on agency letterhead. It does not have to be, but it must, again, include your name so they know who the heck it is that this person is recommending. They have to include an actual recommendation that the person believes that you qualify and you would be a good candidate for grandparenting, and the person who's completing the recommendation, their name and title. I would also say that it should probably include their contact information, either their phone number or their email, just to verify that it is, the person knows you and that it is valid. Although it does not say that on here. So do with that what you will. And then finally, you need a self-recommendation describing your current role and responsibilities as a peer. So your letter of self-recommendation, it has to include your own name, obviously, and a description of your current role and responsibilities as a peer. The letter shall not exceed 1 page in length. Now, I will tell you that the template that Cal Mesa provided is more than 1 page in length. So I guess if you write it yourself, it cannot be more than 1 page. If you use Cal Mesa's template, then go to town, right? So here is a quick documentation checklist for grandparenting. You need a copy of your current government-issued photo ID with your date of birth. You need a copy of your high school diploma, GED equivalent, college degree, or transcripts. You need a letter from your current or past employer on agency letterhead confirming that you were employed as a peer on January 1st of 22. Again, tip, use your supervisor letter of recommendation for this. You will need a letter from your current or past employer on agency letterhead confirming that you meet the 1,550 hours of work experience requirement. Again, tip, use your supervisor letter of recommendation for this, if applicable. You need proof of completion of a peer training, okay? Again, tip, use your proof of CE trainings for this if your CE trainings, if all your CE training hours qualify towards peer training. I guess it doesn't really matter since there's no minimum hours requirement or maximum, right? All right, use your proof of CE trainings for that. And then you will need to provide proof of completion of 20 hours of CE trainings in the last 2 years with at least 6 hours of these in law and ethics. You need a supervisor letter of recommendation. You need a colleague or professional letter of recommendation. And then you need a letter of self-recommendation, 1 page maximum. So let's talk about it. Steph, let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
What is the minimum number of documents that you need in order to prove that you meet all eligibility requirements for grandparenting?
Should I guess?
Go ahead.
I would guess 7.
You would guess 7?
I would guess 7.
Okay. Even though there are 9 requirements, you would guess
minimum, right?
Yeah,
because you told me we can use 1 document for multiple answers.
You're right. Okay. So it's actually 6. It's 6.
I was close.
I think it's 6 right now. Maybe it's even less. Who knows? But here's how I came up with 6. Okay. So we know that there are 9 requirements that require some sort of documentation. You can use 1 supervisor letter recommendation to fulfill 3 separate requirements. The fact that you were employed as a peer on January 1, your 1,550 hours, and your supervisor letter of recommendation. So let's see, 9 minus 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, right? So we're down to 7 so far. And then you can use your proof of CE training completion to fulfill 2 requirements, which is completion of a peer training and completion of 20 hours of CEs with 6 hours in law and ethics, right? So we're down to 7, minus 2 is 5, plus 1 is 6. So 6. That was a weird way.
That was a lot of math.
Sorry. Anyways, you're going to need at least 6, as far as I can tell. You need at least 6 separate documents to prove that you meet all eligibility requirements. Now, what about the maximum number of documents that you need to prove that you meet all eligibility requirements?
I mean, who knows? Because if I've had like multiple training providers, multiple employers, like that could, I think it depends on the person.
Exactly. It totally depends on the person. Because you might need more than 1 document to prove a single requirement for exactly the reasons that you said. Let's say, for instance, you work 750 hours for one employer and 800 for another. Well, you're going to need 2 separate letters from those different employers in order to show that you meet 1 requirement of 1,550 hours. Let's say you completed 12 CE hours with one agency and 8 hours with another. Again, you're going to need 2 separate documents, right? And maybe those training providers are going to give you 1 document per training completed, right? So let's say you completed 18 courses that add up to 20 hours. Well, then you're going to have 18 separate documents.
Right. But there's a difference between the number of documents and number of files, right? So maybe I have 18 documents, but I might need to combine them.
Right. But see, we're saying what is the maximum number of documents?
Well, I don't want to confuse anyone.
Yeah. So I want everyone to understand, like, okay, just having 1 proof of training completion may not meet the requirement to show that you completed 20 hours of CEs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you might need multiple documents at some point integrated into 1 file that you will then need to upload to your application. Hopefully we didn't lose anybody yet. You can rewind and listen to this again if you need to. All right, so that concludes part 3, which was talking about the documentation that you need to prove that you meet all grandparenting eligibility requirements.
All right, now let's talk about certification scholarships, which is, again, another time-limited opportunity like the grandparenting process.
Right, and we're bringing this up because even though it is completely like kind of separate and it's a different issue than applying for grandparenting, but you're going to apply for a scholarship at the same time. So we wanted to let you know how this works, because if you qualify, then, go for it.
So DHCS created 5,000 scholarships for peers who are seeking certification. So 2,500 of those scholarships are going to be for individuals who are applying for the grandparenting process. And that scholarship is going to cover the application fee and the exam costs. It's a time-limited opportunity. So the applications for scholarships will be open from May 2nd of 2022 to July 31st of 2022. The other 2,500 scholarships will be for individuals who are applying for initial certification, right? So this is individuals who didn't qualify for the grandparenting process and who wouldn't otherwise apply through the out-of-state reciprocity process. And these scholarships are going to cover the application fee, the training fee, and the exam cost. The applications for scholarships open July 1st and close September 30th of 2022. And this application will be available after you complete your certification application. So you'll go in, you'll fill out your certification application, you'll upload all your documents, you'll submit your application, and then you'll have an option to apply for the scholarship. And so it's really important that you get through that application as soon as possible so that you make sure that you have time to get in for that scholarship. It is important to recognize that the scholarships cover the cost of taking the exam once. So if for some reason you don't pass the exam, maybe you're not able to show up for the exam, it only covers that exam one time. So you want to ensure if you get that scholarship that you're meeting all of those requirements, because you will only be able to utilize that scholarship once. So another sense of urgency here. So 52 of the 59 counties are participating in peer certification, okay? DHCS's 5,000 scholarships are allocated to these 52 counties based on their proportionate share of the total Medi-Cal eligible populations for all 52 counties combined. So for example, if the total Medi-Cal eligible population for all 52 participating counties is 100,000 and 55,000 of those reside in LA County would get 55% of the scholarships, or 2,750 of the 5,000 scholarships. So each county is going to get their own number of scholarships. And so, obviously it's time limited, and we know that there's also a limit in the amount of scholarships available in each county. So this isn't something that you want to delay if you are really, dependent on getting one of those scholarships.
I just want to say also, because this is a little bit confusing. So we mentioned that Cal Mesa is administering the scholarships. So even though the number of scholarships that each county is allocated, is just a function of their Medi-Cal eligible populations, it's not as though the counties are going to be handing out scholarships to the peers in their counties, right? So that's a little bit confusing. So when we get into these next few slides that talk about what the county's role is in this process and what Cal Mesa's and what the peers' role is, you have to understand that the number of scholarships that each county is allocated is just a symbolic number, because the county isn't actually physically doing anything with those scholarships.
Got it. So just a reminder, the following 7 counties have not yet opted into Medi-Cal Peer Sports Specialist certification as of April 15th of 22. That's Alpine, City of Berkeley, Imperial, Mariposa, Napa, San Benito, and Tri-City. And we know that the City of Berkeley and Tri-Cities are, even though they're their own behavioral health system, they are part of a county that is opting in. So those two are a little bit of an outlier, and you might want to look into that a little bit. So here's a quick overview of the scholarships. So Cal Mesa administers and awards the scholarships. Counties are going to identify the peers who are eligible for the scholarships, and peers apply for scholarships through Cal Mesa as a part of the online certification application. Okay, so Cal Mesa is the one that you're going to apply through. They're going to actually say, hey, Kathy, you get a scholarship. But counties are identifying peers who are eligible. So counties are actually creating their own list of peers who are working within their system, whether it's a county peer or a peer working for a contracted agency within that county. They'll submit those names to Cal Mesa, right? So you want to ensure that you're on one of those lists in order to qualify for one of these scholarships for grandparenting or the initial certification process.
Exactly. And you can still complete the scholarship application once you've completed your certification application. But the issue is that if you're not on your county's list of eligible peers, then you're not going to get a scholarship. So you will have completed that scholarship application for no reason. You need both. You need to be both on your county's list, and you need to also complete the scholarship application through CalMesa.
And I mean, again, like you even if you don't qualify for the scholarship, but you want to get certified, you still want to apply for certification, right? You just might not be eligible for the scholarship piece of it. And I think something else to consider as well is that we have a lot of peers within our state who may not work in a county system, right? They might be working for a statewide initiative. They might be working in other roles outside of the county system. And so I just think it's important for people to when we're talking about scholarships, there are for peers who are working within county systems. It's not going to be for every peer who's working across the state. So what's CalMesa's role? So CalMesa reviews the certification applications for completion and confirms the documentation of all eligibility requirements. They're going to review the scholarship applications for completion and responsiveness to a narrative question. So a short paragraph essay. They're going to check the peers' names against the participating counties' lists of scholarship eligible peers. And then they'll award the scholarships to the peers on a first applied, first awarded basis. And they'll email the peer the status of their scholarship application, right? So CalMesa is going to say, oh, great, you applied, you got all the documentation. Great. Oh, you want a scholarship too? Okay, we're going to check out your narrative. We're going to see if your county submitted your name to see if you're eligible. And then we're going to let you know if you qualified. And again, it's a first come, first award, first applied, first awarded. So this is where that sense of urgency comes in, that if you know you're working within a county system, you want to make sure that you are applying for certification and that scholarship sooner than later, because we know that there are a limited number of scholarships that are going to be available for each county.
And I believe that CalMesa will be notifying peers of the status of their scholarship application within 30 days of applying. So again, that's what that sense of urgency comes from. And, there could be situations where there's not enough peers who apply for, say, LA County, who's going to probably get the bulk of the scholarships. Maybe not enough peers applied for the scholarships through LA County, in which case it'll probably go back into a pool. But we're not going to know until the application period closes at the end of July. So you want to get your application in as soon as possible. You want to make sure that you apply, for that scholarship, even before you've received confirmation that you're on your county's list, I would say. But just know that you're not going to get the scholarship if you're not on your county's list eventually.
Right. And if I'm on my county's list and I don't get it initially, I might have an opportunity to get it as part of a wait list or some other way based on any of the scholarships that weren't utilized.
Exactly.
So what's the county's role? So each county is going to develop their own internal process for selecting which peers it's going to place on a scholarship list for CalMesa. And there's some criteria. So peers need to be currently employed in the county's behavioral health system. They may work for the county directly or for one of its contracted providers, and they may work in mental health or substance use services, right? So remember, with peer certification, it's not just mental health, it's mental health and substance use.
And I think one of the things that we're realizing is that every county really does have its own process for this. And it's kind of the Wild West out there. There's no clear guidelines on how peers need to be considered for this list. A lot of counties are just kind of like sending out emails to their providers and saying, hey, who are your peers? Who do you want on this list? They're not necessarily considering peers' language capacity, whether they represent, certain communities that are, within their county jurisdictions. They're not necessarily considering the length of employment of the peer, as long as you meet the minimum criteria for grandparenting. So it's just something for you to be aware of. At least from the counties that we've observed, that is what's happening. Other counties may have, more of an organized process. I'm assuming for larger counties that have a lot of peers that they might have a more organized process. Also, they're not providing any clarification to their providers on whether it's okay to include peers who are volunteers, because you might have volunteers who do qualify for grandparenting, but they're not in a paid role. So these are just some things to be mindful of, because every county, like I said, is going to have its own process, and they're going to come up with their own criteria on how peers are prioritized.
Yeah, and I mean, regardless of which county you're in, the county is supposed to be informing the peers of the process on how to be placed on a scholarship list. That information might not go to you directly. It might be going to your employer. It might be going somewhere else. And so you might want to reach out to your supervisors, managers to find out like, hey, do we know what's going on and have we submitted our names? Counties are going to provide Cal Mesa with its list of scholarship eligible peers. And so you may, beyond your manager or supervisor, you may need to reach out to your county's behavioral health director or MHSA coordinator or WET coordinator or whoever is compiling that list to send to Cal Mesa.
And I also think it's going to be kind of a weird thing too, because I don't know how long counties have, like if they can constantly be updating their list, for instance. Let's say they send out an initial list to Cal Mesa and then that list didn't account for all of the scholarships that were available in that county, right? Or their providers didn't respond quickly enough, and then they send out a new updated list. So there may be some weird kind of crossovers and timing with how long it takes for Cal Mesa to verify whether or not you're on your county's list based on when your county gets its list into Cal Mesa and all of that. So, again, like I said, we're kind of in the Wild West right now. There are a lot of weird scenarios that I can think of where people may like kind of slip through the cracks. And so it's important to know, and be able to verify, was your application submitted and are you on your county's list?
And I think really I think that's part of why that sense of urgency is important. Like if you meet all the requirements to get on these applications sooner than later, because we're still early in the application process and you don't want to wait until the last week that scholarships are available to start figuring out this and having to reach out to people and things like that. So definitely want to take advantage of this opportunity while it's kind of fresh and still available.
Right.
So what's your role, right, as the peer? So you want to follow your county's process to get placed on the scholarship list, right? How do you get on that list? Follow that process, whoever you got to submit your name to. You want to apply for a scholarship when you're completing your online certification application with Cal Mesa, right? So you're going to complete your application. As soon as you're done with your application, you're going to have an option to apply for that scholarship. You want to do it right then. And they're going to ask you to answer a question. So we said you'll have to provide a narrative, right? So you're going to answer the following question as part of your scholarship application. You'll respond to this prompt. Please describe your skills, activities, and work or volunteer experience doing peer support services. And you need to be able to do that within 150 words, right? Tip, this information should already be in your letter of self-recommendation for grandparenting, right? So if you've written that recommendation for yourself, you should already have this information. You might want to open up another document and narrow it down to that 150 words. Again, before you do your application. So once your application is submitted, it asks if you want to apply for the scholarship. You're going to say yes. You're going to go ahead and paste your response in there and just making sure that you have it ready so you can get that whole process completed at one time.
Exactly.
So if you receive a scholarship, Cal Mesa is going to notify you by email. Your scholarship will cover your grandparenting application fee and the cost of taking the exam once. Again, one time it's going to cover your exam fee. Cal Mesa will waive your application fee and exam fee. So you're not going to get a check in the mail. You're going to basically say that, hey, you're being notified that you qualify for this scholarship, you receive the scholarship, and then when you complete your application and your exam, Cal Mesa is just going to waive the fee. So there's going to be no exchange of money. You'll just won't have to pay a fee at those times. You must register for the certification exam by November 30th of 2022. Okay, so let's say by the end of May, you've completed your grandparenting application, you've got approved for a scholarship. If you do not register for the exam by November 30th, a portion of your scholarship, the part that covers the exam fee, will be forfeited. So again, there's the sense of urgency, these time restraints. You need to not only ensure that you're applying early to get those scholarships, you actually need to finish your certification process by a certain date, right? Including registering for that exam.
Yeah, and it's not clear when they're going to be administering the exams and maybe you can register by November 30th for a future date. That's what it sounds like you'll need to do, but you have to have registered for the exam by no later than November 30th, or they're just gonna, that the funds for that exam fee are gonna evaporate.
All right, and you'll have to pay for it.
Yep, exactly.
So if you do not receive a scholarship, you want to reach out to Cal Mesa and confirm that your grandparenting and scholarship applications are complete, that you've answered all the questions, you've provided all the documentation, and you want to confirm that you are on your county scholarship list. So assuming there's no problems with one or two, so they got your scholarship application, it's complete, you answered everything, you uploaded everything, you're on your county scholarship list, then your name will be added to the Cal Mesa scholarship waitlist, and Cal Mesa will award scholarships to waitlist peers in order of application receipt. Okay. And then they're going to notify you by email if you're chosen from the waitlist. So no matter what, you want to get your applications in as soon as possible. And I would even say, don't even wait to find out if you're on your county's list. Apply, get in line for those scholarships. And, just to ensure that you're farther up on the list, even if you end up on the wait list, you want to make sure that you have a better opportunity of actually getting that scholarship. So waitlist considerations. In reviewing waitlisted applications, Cal Mesa may consider individual responses to the narrative question in the application. So they want, how well did you answer the question? And then they might also consider applicants from underrepresented racial, ethnic, cultural, and other diverse backgrounds. We don't know about language capacity at this time, but when thinking about how are they going to, prioritize people in the wait list, they're really looking at, how did you respond to that narrative question? So you want to make sure you're very thoughtful in your response. And then just, recognizing that there might be some priority when it comes to underrepresented groups.
Yeah, and they do ask in the application itself, like how you identify, like what your racial or ethnic background is, like, and what your gender identity, the languages that you speak. So that is information that they do collect. So they may potentially consider that when they're awarding. I think that language capacity and the threshold languages for your county where you work are hugely important. So,
well, and if this is something that they're weighing, this is not a section of your application that you want to decline to state any of those things. Because I know a lot of times people are like, well, I don't want to share my demographics. But in this case, you may want to share your demographics, especially if you're from an underrepresented group, because that might have weight on whether or not you get a scholarship if you're on that wait list.
Right, exactly. All right, so we've talked a lot about what the online application looks like, how you submit it and all of that. And in this section, we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to submit your online application, literally. So when you're submitting your applications, you're going to submit them online at this website here, www.capeercertification.org. Okay, that's Cal Mesa's peer certification website. You want to make sure that you have everything in order and ready to go before you begin. Okay, you need to have all documentation of your eligibility requirements saved as digital files. You also want to have a pre-written response to the scholarship application questions. You should set aside at least 30 minutes of uninterrupted time to complete your application, because part of the application is going to be an orientation video that you have to watch. You want to make sure that you review and proofread everything before you submit. And then you should also plan to pay the application fee when you submit. And I put a little asterisk here. Basically, plan to pay the application fee unless you're also applying for a scholarship at the same time. As of today's date, we don't know what the application fee is going to be. I will say that when I attempted to do the application myself, I also did a scholarship application, and it did not prompt me to pay any fee. I just was able to submit. So probably between now and maybe, July, they are going to not immediately require you to pay an application fee as long as you apply for a scholarship. But if you don't apply for a scholarship, or if you apply after that date, or if you don't get a scholarship, you may basically get a prompt to pay the application fee. Again, we don't know what that fee is going to be. Application review and determination. So CalMesa is going to review your application for completeness and may independently verify all information and documentation that you provide, okay? So that's why it's really important to make sure that your documentation is accurate and verifiable, okay? So for instance, if your supervisor is writing a letter of recommendation, maybe they use the CalMesa letter of recommendation template, but they didn't put it on company letterhead. That's going to be something that you want to make sure that you consider, okay? Because a little technical, mishap like that could create issues with your application. Also, if you're getting certificates of completion for your training requirements and there's no training provider, or the hours aren't on there, or the date that you completed the training isn't on there, or there's no contact information for the training provider, you're going to have issues. So you want to just make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, and you want to look at the documentation that you're providing and say, if I'm CalMesa, based on the information that's in this document, can I independently verify that this requirement is met? Can I call the supervisor and say, did you write this letter of recommendation, if they had to, okay? And if the answer to that question is no, that they cannot independently verify the information that you've provided based on what's in the document, then you may have some issues. You may want to reach out to CalMesa and ask for clarification prior to submitting that documentation. Now, if anything is incomplete or unintentionally inaccurate, maybe you made an error, it was a typo, you clicked on the number 4 instead of the number 7, CalMesa may give you an opportunity to supplement that information or correct it. They may also request additional clarification or documentation from you, right? So again, going through your documentation, if they can't independently verify it, if it doesn't contain all the information that's required, they might reach out to you and ask for additional information, which can delay your application, which could in turn delay your scholarship determination. Because remember, they're not going to make a determination on your scholarship until they determine that you meet the requirements for certification, okay? They can't approve your scholarship if you're not eligible for certification. So you want to make sure that everything is up to date, accurate, and put together as possible. Now, if any information is knowingly false or fraudulent, right? If you knowingly submitted false information, CalMesa may and probably will reject your application, and they could even bar you from reapplying, okay? So you want to make sure that, that all the information that you're providing is accurate. Let's say you know that you really only completed 1,200 hours, but you say, yeah, I completed 1,550 hours. If they contact your supervisor and your supervisor's like, no, they only worked 1,200, you're going to have an issue. And then finally, CalMesa will notify you of its decision on your grandparenting application and any next steps by email. Now, as I said, you want to make sure that you have all of your documentation. You've gathered all of your proof of eligibility requirements, and it's ready to go. Make sure that it is saved as digital files on whatever computer or device that you are using to apply for certification. And to prevent confusion, you want to save one file per eligibility requirement. What do I mean? So you want to save documentation for different requirements as separate digital files. So for example, you want to save your photo ID as one file and your high school diploma as another file. Don't combine them into one file, right? That's really confusing, because then whoever it is at CalMesa is going to have to tab through those pages in order to make sure that you meet the requirements. You also want to save all your documentation for a single requirement as a single digital file. So again, for example, if you acquired your 1,550 hours of work experience from multiple employers, you want to integrate your verification letters from each employer into one file. If you're applying for a scholarship, write your response to the narrative question in advance, right? Again, and that narrative question is, please describe your skills, activity, and work or volunteer experience during doing peer support services, 150 words max. And again, the tip, this information should already be in your letter of self-recommendation for grandparenting certification. And finally, an important reminder, the Medi-Cal Code of Ethics for Peer Support Specialists in California forbids peers from securing a certification by fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation, okay? This includes, but is not limited to, making false statements in your application for certification, withholding material information on any application for certification, or impersonating another peer support specialist, or permitting or allowing another person to use your own certification for the purpose of providing peer support services. So the bottom line is make sure the information in your application is 100% truthful and complete and accurate as possible. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So what does that grandparenting application process actually look like? Okay, what are the steps? It's actually pretty simple. You're going to create an account at Cal Mesa's peer certification website, which again is www.capeercertification.org. You're going to have to watch, this should say Medi-Cal, not Med-Cal, my bad, Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist Orientation and Self-Assessment Video. It says it's about 30 minutes. It's not, it's less. I'd say it's like 15 or 20 minutes at the very most. It goes by very quickly. It's only 26 slides. You're going to need to complete your grandparenting application between May 2nd and December 31st of 2022 and upload obviously the required documentation in your grandparenting application. And then if you want to apply for a scholarship, you need to do so between May 2nd and July 31st of 2022. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these 4 steps. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to www.capeercertification.org and create an account. Okay, so this is what the homepage of the website looks like as of yesterday, May 9th of 2022. How are you going to create an account? Right here, you're going to click this button that says register or log in. Okay, so when you click that button, it's going to take you to this screen and you're going to select the option that says sign up. Okay, so when you click on that area that says sign up, it's going to give you the option to sign up with an existing Google account. So if you have a Gmail, if you have a Microsoft account, or from any other email, you can use that information in order to sign up. And then once you do that, it's going to take you to this dashboard. Okay, so steps for Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist certification. Step 1, create an account. You have done that process at that time, okay? And as you can see below, step 2 is to watch the Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist orientation and self-assessment video. So here is a video of what this looks like. So when you click on the link that was available on your dashboard to watch the orientation video, it's going to open up in a new window or a new tab, and it's going to take you to this LMS, this learning management system interface. And so it'll immediately take you here to complete the orientation video, and you're going to click right here that says go to course. Then it's going to take you to another page, and you're going to click here to start video. And then finally, it will take you to this page where you're actually going to watch the orientation video itself, okay? And as I mentioned, it's only 26 slides. It goes by very quickly. You're going to watch that video, and as soon as you're done, you're going to go back to your dashboard, okay? Your dashboard will have already updated that you have completed the orientation video. You're going to click here under step 3 to start a new application. And when you get there, you're going to see this information. Here's a quick video of what you're going to see when you start your new application. And as you can see here, there are just check boxes to verify that you meet the basic eligibility requirements. All right. And so once you verify that you meet all of the basic eligibility requirements, it's going to take you into the application itself. So once you have completed the application, it's going to look something like this once you filled out all of the fields. And just so you know, because I had to create an account with my current work email, my work email address is going to come up on the screen. Guys, don't email me about this. I'm not going to respond to your emails about the application, okay? Just letting you all know in advance, please do not. You need to contact Cal Mesa if you have any issues about the application. This is just for you to know what the application looks like. So as you can see, it's going to ask you to fill out your personal contact information, your date of birth, your driver's license or ID number. So that's an issue, right? If you're using something that isn't a driver's license or an ID, you're not necessarily going to have an ID number unless that's something like on your passport or on your student ID or whatever. It's going to ask you for information about your employment history, your lived experience, whether you meet the minimum hours requirement, okay? So you're gonna need to upload a file to show that you meet those requirements for each one. Your training requirements, all of that. And then your letters of recommendation. And then it's going to ask you if you agree to the code of ethics. And as I mentioned right here, this is the code of ethics. And it's going to go through the code of ethics. And at the very end, you're going to agree to it. And then you're going to sign to show that you agree to it. And then you're just going to save it. And that's it. It's really simple. You just submit your application just like that. All right. And then as you can see, it gives you an overview of your application information. And then you click on that button to apply for a scholarship. So step 4 is to apply for the scholarship, right? And so as we showed in the previous video, once you have completed your grandparenting application, it's going to take you to this screen where you are going to be prompted to apply for a scholarship if that is something that you want to do. So you're going to click on that blue button there that says apply for scholarship. It's going to give you an overview of the scholarship information, the dates that you need to apply. It's going to make sure that you verify that the information in your main application is accurate. It's going to ask you to select your county of residence. And it's also going to ask you to identify your race, your gender, and your primary language. Now you can decline to answer any of these, but remember, if you are placed on the wait list, they may select waitlist candidates based on some of this information. So keep that in mind when you're deciding how to respond to those demographic questions. It's going to ask for your employment status. And then finally, it's going to ask you to describe your skills, activities, and work or volunteer experience doing peer support services, 150 words max. You're going to fill out that information, which is a narrative question. And then you're going to click this box if you want to be an early tester for the certification exam. That's it. And then you just click submit to submit your scholarship application. And that is that. Okay. All of your information is going to be in here. You want to verify that it's accurate, and you will have an opportunity to revise your application if necessary. You would just click that button to revise your application. But that's pretty much it. It goes really, really quickly, and it is not very complicated at all. The biggest hassle for you is going to make sure that you have all of your documentation in order and ready to go to submit your application. So that's that.
So now let's recap and talk about next steps. I know we gave you a whole lot of information, so let's try to wrap it up for you. So quick certification overview. So to use the new Medi-Cal billing codes for peer support specialist services, counties must affirmatively opt in to peer certification. Peers must be certified in California, and services that the peers deliver must be authorized by CMS Medicaid. Cal Mesa will act as the certifying body for the 52 participating counties, and peers must meet all eligibility requirements to be certified. Peers first acquire certification through one of the three processes. So again, you can apply through grandparenting just through the end of the year, out-of-state reciprocity, or initial certification. So let's review basic eligibility requirements. So in order to qualify for grandparenting, you need to work or volunteer in a participating county. You need to be 18 years or older, have a high school diploma, GED or equivalent, or college degree. You need to self-identify as a client or consumer living in recovery, or as a parent or caregiver or family member of a client or consumer. You need to be willing to share your lived experience, have a strong dedication to recovery, agree to the Medi-Cal Code of Ethics in the application, complete a curriculum and training requirements, which you would do before you apply, and then pass the certification exam after you apply. A quick reminder of which counties are not participating in the Medi-Cal Peer Support Specialist certification as of April 15th of 22. Those are Alpine, City of Berkeley, Imperial, Mariposa, Napa, San Benito, and Tri-City. So here's the eligibility requirements specific to grandparenting. So you need to apply for grandparenting by December 31st of 22. You need to be employed as a peer as of January 1st of 22. You need to have 1 year, so at least 12 months, and 1,550 hours of paid or unpaid work experience as a peer specialist, or 1,550 hours of experience working as a peer specialist in the last 3 years, with at least 500 of those hours being completed in the last 12 months. You need to have 20 hours of continuing education training in the last 2 years, including at least 6 hours of law and ethics. You need to complete a peer training and have 3 letters of recommendation. So 1 from a supervisor, 1 from a colleague or other professional, and 1 self-recommendation describing your current role and responsibilities as a peer support specialist. Again, we have our documentation checklist, right? So you may want to pull out your phone and take a picture of this. But you want to make sure you have a copy of your current government-issued photo ID with your date of birth, a copy of your high school diploma, GED equivalent, college degree, or transcripts. You want to ensure you have a letter from your current or past employer on agency letterhead confirming that you were employed as a peer on January 1st of 22. A quick tip for this, you might want to try to use your supervisor letter of recommendation to not only provide a recommendation, but also confirm your employment on January 1st. You need a letter from a current or past employer on agency letterhead confirming you meet the 1,550 hours of work experience. And again, that same tip, you might want to incorporate this information into your supervisor letter of recommendation. You want to provide proof of completion of a peer training. So you may use your proof of continuing education training in lieu of providing the certificate for peer trainings. You want to provide proof of completion of 20 hours of CE trainings within the last 2 years, with at least 6 of those hours being in law and ethics. You need a supervisor letter of recommendation, a letter of recommendation from a colleague or another professional, and a letter of self-recommendation that cannot exceed 1 page. Cal Mesa did provide a letter of recommendation template. Again, it's available at this website. It can be used for all 3 letters, whether it be the supervisor, colleague, or self. There are, some instructions you want to follow. So you want to download the document to your computer. You're going to type in the requested information. You will save the letter. You will sign the letter. You will scan the signed letter to create a PDF and upload the letter to your online certification application. Now, right now, it's unclear how this template is going to meet the requirements that the supervisor letter of recommendation needs to be on company letterhead. Some people can easily figure that out, throw a document onto letterhead. For other people, it might be more difficult. So if it's more difficult, you might choose to have a letter kind of written out.
Following the template.
Follow the template. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you want to have everything ready to go before you start your application. So you want to gather all your documentation, proof of eligibility requirements. You want to save those documents as digital files on your computer or whichever device that you are going to be using for your application. So you want to ensure that they are formatted as a PDF, a JPG, a JPEG, a PNG file. Those usually work best. And to prevent any confusion, you want to save one file per eligibility requirement, right? So you want to save the documentation for different requirements as a separate digital file. So you're going to save your photo ID as one file, your high school diploma as another file, right? So wherever you're providing proof, you want to have an individual document file for that bit of proof that you need to provide. And that might include combining documents into one file. You want to save all documentation for a single requirement as a single digital file, right? So this just goes to my point where you may have 1,550 hours of work experience that were acquired from multiple employers, and you're going to need to combine those verification letters from each employer into one file. So you would still have like 2 letters, but they would be in one file that you would upload to the application. A quick overview of scholarships. So Cal Mesa is going to administer and award the scholarships. Counties are identifying peers who are going to be eligible for those scholarships, and then peers apply for the scholarship through Cal Mesa as part of the online certification application. So remember, you'll fill out the application, you'll submit it, and then you'll have a prompt asking you if you'd like to apply for a scholarship, and you'll want to ensure that you do it right then. So your role when it comes to scholarships. So you want to follow your county's process to get placed on that scholarship list. So you may want to reach out to your behavioral health director, an MHSA coordinator, or a WET coordinator.
If your supervisor doesn't know.
Yeah, go to supervisor manager first, right? See if they can find out. And if not, there are often folks at the county who may have that information. You want to apply for a scholarship when you're completing your online certification application with Cal Mesa. Again, completing that application first, you'll be prompted for the scholarship application after that. Be prepared to answer the following question as part of your scholarship application. So you're going to describe your skills, activities, and work or volunteer experience doing peer support services, and you're allowed 150 words maximum for that response. And again, if you've already done your letter of self-recommendation, you should be able to pull that information from there to respond to the scholarship application. Important dates and deadlines. So May 2nd, the Grandparenting Certification and Scholarship application opened. The deadline to apply for the Grandparenting Scholarship will be July 31st of 22. The deadline to register for the certification exam, if you're awarded a Grandparenting Scholarship, is November 30th. So if you get that scholarship, you need to register to take the exam by November 30th, or you are forfeiting your scholarship to cover the exam fee. And December 31st, 22 is going to be the deadline to apply for grandparenting certification. So if you do not finish applying by December 31st, then you will have to apply through initial certification or out-of-state reciprocity. So information and support. If you are a Cal Voices employee, you want to reach out to your direct supervisor or manager if you need support in this process. And for any Cal Voices program managers, supervisors, you can reach out to me, Stephanie Ramos, directly. You have my information. If you are not a Cal Voices employee or the general public, we encourage you to go to Cal Mesa's peer certification website, which is www.capeercertification.org, or email Cal Mesa at peercertification@calmesa.org.
Don't email me.
That was Daniel. So that wraps up our brief webinar on the grandparenting process. You may have more questions, need more support. But again, if you're a Cal Voices employees, please reach out to direct supervisor, manager, or myself. And for the general public, I know Cal Mesa has been setting up their site. They have their email set up, different ways to support folks in the community who are looking forward to certification.
And I think they've been pretty responsive to the public as well. So if you have any questions, and there are some outstanding questions that we didn't know the answers to in this webinar, then feel free to reach out to them. And if you get an answer from them that answers one of the questions that we didn't know, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you can email me for.
Thank you all for your time and for your interest. We are excited about certification, and hopefully the information today can help you on your journey.
Thank you so much.